Hello and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. On behalf of OTC Markets, we are very pleased you have joined us for our two-day Precious Metals and Critical Minerals Conference. The next presentation of the day is from AEF Fuels. Please note you may submit questions for the presenter at any time. You can also view a company's availability for a one-on-one meeting by clicking Book a Meeting. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Gary Lewis, founder, CEO, and executive director of AEF Fuels, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol NRGFF and on the TSXV under the symbol AEF. Welcome, Gary.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity. Cautionary statements. This presentation is on our website, so if anyone wants to read deeper into this slide, they're more than welcome to do so. In terms of our business, Advanced Energy Fuels, we have two brownfields projects and we're targeting higher value critical mineral supply chains. So what does that mean? It means we're not really focused on the mining piece, we're focused on the downstream piece. In terms of key markets that we're targeting, we have a manganese project, so we're targeting high purity manganese battery materials, and we have a Fluorospar project targeting fluorine supply chains. In terms of the tailwinds supporting our business, we're aligned to structural growth markets, battery materials growing, fluorochemicals, hydrofluoric acid, highly strategic, high growth industry, particularly in the US, semiconductors and AI infrastructure. We all know the growth profile around those industries. Nuclear energy, a renaissance in nuclear energy globally. Defence and aerospace, obviously with the world as it stands at the moment, defence is not only a high value area, but a fastly growing area. And the energy transition infrastructure, which is maturing, and it's been the case for many years. Two strategic critical minerals. So these are critical minerals in the true sense, defined as critical minerals in America, in Europe, and in Japan and Australia. So again, manganese for battery materials, energy infrastructure, fluorospar for fluorochemicals, advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, hydrofluoric acid supply chains. And both of these materials are positioned to benefit from growing investment in secure Western supply chains. That is the key opportunity that's backing our business and backing this opportunity. We have multiple near-term catalysts. We're a company that does stuff. We're certainly not sits back and just wait for things to happen. Focused on the downstream, as I say. So battery grade, high purity manganese sulfate, HPMSM development, advancing. I'll talk more about that. Downstream electrolytic manganese dioxide, electrolytic manganese metal. In terms of optionality, I'll talk a bit more about that. Our manganese project is in the process of completing a PFS, which will be finished next year. In terms of our fluorite-rich Fluorospar project, it's a brownfields development opportunity, historic producer. I'll talk about what we're doing there. And strategic partnerships and government support initiatives. We've been doing that almost from day one, given, we're going into downstream strategic markets. So it's important that we're both talking to key supply chain partners, as well as trying to get the support of government, both in Australia and America. Government aligned strategy. So this is on point. I was in Washington back in April for a conference, and there's so much government interest here because it is strategic. It's national security. So US critical mineral security objectives, Australia-US critical minerals cooperation, and Western supply chain resilience. That's the key theme running through our business and this opportunity again. So it's onshoring in the US where possible and reshoring to the US where that's not possible. In terms of our capital structure, I created this business through the lens of an investor. I'm a long-time investor. I invest alongside my shareholders, 52% insider ownership, 47 million shares fully diluted. So there's significant leverage for investors in the successful outcomes in this project. I mentioned we have two projects. It is a strategic project, both projects 100% owned, low friction resource development with value-added processing. So what does that mean? The biggest development risk, in my view, one of the biggest development risks, aside from normal development, issues, is social license. There's nothing worse than having a project, and I've been there in the past, where you've got all the hallmarks of a wonderful development project, but then you encounter some form of social unrest, and that's what I call social friction. Our industry is great at the quantitative bits. Whether it's the MPVs, the DFS, the PFS, the PEAs, all those acronyms. We're great at all those quantitative things, but we do tend to struggle with the qualitative things, and that's what I mean by social friction. It's when somebody comes up with a dirty glass of water and said, look what you've done in my water. When you haven't drilled, you haven't explored, you've done nothing, but that's just the emotion around this space. And what makes it worse is we in the critical minerals industry, we're professing to save the world, but just because you're saving the world, it doesn't mean you can sully somebody's backyard or destroy the environment. So we're creating heightened expectations, meaning, we have a tougher job to meet those expectations when it comes to getting a social license to approve these projects. That's why on the manganese side, you'll see a picture of Australia and a picture of America. We're in the Pilbara in Western Australia for our manganese project, one of the great mining jurisdictions, not just in Australia, but globally. Why? Because, again, one of the main reasons for me is not just for this infrastructure, not because it's a prolific manganese district, because it's got an incredibly low social friction. 10,000 people at 500,000 square kilometres means the propensity to encounter societal problems is lessened. It doesn't mean we're not dealing with the environment and dealing with First Nations people. We're in front of that. In fact, Western Australia has great structure. It's legislated in terms of the benefit sharing with First Nations people. All of that it's not a case of it is in some parts of the world where the government says good luck, go and negotiate. All these things are firmly in place in Western Australia. So it's a great jurisdiction to be in for a project. So our business model here is to mine in Australia where you've got the great social license and then ship to the US where we've got the high value downstream market. So our upstream target is manganese, of course. Our downstream target, high purity manganese sulfate, which is for batteries, both mobility, electric vehicles and stationary battery energy storage systems. Electrolytic manganese dioxide, electrolytic manganese metal. So it's a battery manganese pathway, which is our strategic positioning. The asset stage is pre-feasibility, existing resource. What I don't do in business is drill unnecessarily because the value is not in the economic value is not in the resource. The strategic value is in the resource because you want to own the whole supply chain. But when we have a resource, we've got between 15 and 20 years of mine life through our own estimations and through some independent work that we've done. That's enough to get going. So our focus is downstream. And that's why next phases of work is increasing our pilot test work and engineering and permitting, which will be the remaining pieces to complete our PFS. In terms of Fluorite Ridge, I hadn't heard of Fluorospar back in 2023 when I first started establishing this business. And I was originally drawn to it because it was across the battery, the anode, the cathode, and the electrolyte. So when we looked at, and the other key point about that is America was the #1 producer of Fluorospar, but then the economics dropped out of that market back in the 40s and 50s, and then literally everyone stopped mining Fluorospar in America. So when we first started looking for properties in America, we were an early mover. We weren't the first mover, but an early mover, and so we had pretty much access to go anywhere. All the historic mining was underground. What we liked about New Mexico was the possibility of doing open pit mining, and that's the same as what we'll be doing in Western Australia as well, because that gives us attractive economics both from an OPEX point of view and from a CAPEX point of view. So again, the upstream target is Fluorospar, the downstream target is Azotspar and Metspar. We're looking for domestic feedstock supporting US fluorine and hydrofluoric acid supply chains. These are highly strategic industries in America, whereas the battery industry is growing in America and they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build that industry. The HF and fluorine supply chains exist, strategic, 100% import. Fluorospar is 100% imported into America, as is manganese. Brownfield development, as I say, but we are going back and doing the nuts and bolts. These areas have never been explored, so we do want to build the base case for expanding beyond the historic underground mining. And in terms of where we're at now, it's in the resource definition development study status. This is the opportunity here, and I'm sorry it is a messy slide, but I'll just draw your attention to the centerpieces. It's not about mining, it's not about reserves or producing concentrates. That's not the problem as we see it in global supply chains. It's the third column, which is the conversion. It's the processing. And this is talking specifically about manganese. So you can see in terms of mining manganese, it's diversified. No single country has more than 35% share of mining capacity. Same with manganese reserves. In fact, it's more diversified, no more than 25% with any one country. But if you look at the conversion, look at the downstream processing, midstream and downstream processing, 96% is in China. That's where the West has let China have a free license. And that's the opportunity. And that's why our focus, yes, we have to mine these materials. Yes, we have to produce a concentrate, but our focus is on the conversion, what they call the missing middle, because that's ultimately how we bring resilience back to Western and in particular US supply chains. So that's the gap that we're trying to fill. It's mining alone that does not create a supply chain. You need all of the pieces right through to producing a finished product. In terms of, I'm now going to turn specifically to manganese. In terms of manganese and battery chemistries as they're evolving, manganese is the place I want to be. We know that batteries are growing, as I say, both for EVs and stationary utility supply, energy storage, etc. Manganese is where you want to be because it's a growing share in a growing market. Why is manganese growing? Because it's the place that certainly the larger EV companies in particular are seeing the propensity for mass appeal, because what manganese does is reduce costs, so it reduces the bill of materials. It increases safety, increases stability. So we know about the fear of range anxiety, the range anxiety. So manganese is one key material that can assist with the increasing density, therefore increasing battery life. And as I say, more importantly, or as importantly, reduce the cost. So we're seeing growth in battery chemistries, lithium manganese rich. So we've seen both GM and Ford putting a lot of money into, and that's going to be the focus of their businesses. We've heard of lithium iron phosphate batteries, which is the mass battery being developed in China in particular. Well, the adjunct of that is lithium manganese iron phosphate batteries, so LMFP. So we can see these new battery chemistries containing manganese heavy, manganese rich. We're also seeing, when we look at battery technologies generally, solid state sodium ion batteries, manganese is applicable to all these different technologies. So we're not only applicable to new technologies, it's also applicable to new chemistries as well. Turning to the project itself, this is a large project, but in terms of our own focus, as again, we're not focused on below the ground as the want in critical minerals project. We're more focused above the ground, which is where the value is. So we can see there with that star, that's where our resource is. That's the 11.3 million tonnes at 15% MN. That represents about 2.5% of our total land package. We're not focused on the rest of the land package at the moment because, as I said, we know we've got enough for 15, 20-year mine life. We're focused on, can we take that material, can we take that dirty bit of rock, that ore, turn it into a concentrate, and then take the concentrate and turn it into a high purity battery material. That's what we've been focused on, and that's what we'll continue to be focused on. That doesn't mean that we won't come back to this, incredibly prospective land package. In fact, we have done a little bit of work in the north, in Pirana. We can see that up there. The reason that's one area that we're interested in is because Australia's high-grade, long-life manganese mine, the Woody mine, is about 20 to 30 kilometres to the northeast of Pirana. So we've done a little bit of work on that, preparing for some eventual drilling next year. But that's about resource extension. It's not about exploration as an end in itself. We have enough, I say again, we have enough to get going. That's what we're doing. So this area where our land mass is, established manganese district, we've got scalable opportunity in terms of being able to build on an existing resource base with multiple high-grade targets across the project. But it is the basis for developing a pathway to battery materials, and that's the work that we've been done. The other key thing we've been doing is the development and permitting foundation, because without that, we don't have a project. So we have agreements with First Nations on both halves of our project. We're in our second year of both baseline and flora-fauna studies on the environmental side. So we're doing all of the work that will then feed into our pre-feasibility study. And these can tend to be the stages, funnily enough, that companies forget about and start doing too late, because you need 2 years of baseline environmental studies. So we're well into those studies. I mentioned briefly Pirana. I'll just go back. That's the area in the north. We've done some work there, just some gravity work, just to identify future drill targets. And that, again, is all about resource expansion. We did some early work back in 2024. We had some rock chip sampling where we saw some incredibly high anomalies, assays, up into the mid and high 40% MN. The work that we've been doing, we're still waiting on the 3D inversion modelling to be completed, but we're seeing great synchronisation between the work that we're doing on the gravity with the work we've done previously on the rock chip samples. So this augurs well for having some drill-ready targets to go and drill out a resource. And that's something, as I say, we're planning for next year. It's not the focus of the business, but it's about having future resource extensions. This is the focus of the business, building a battery materials platform. So what does that mean? I say again, it's about taking the resource, which we have, finding the pathway to beneficiation, so taking the ore, producing a concentrate. So we've shown we can do that. We've shown we can do it at scale and we can do it stably. Taking that concentrate, producing a manganese sulfate. We know we can do that. We've done it both at bench in the lab, and now we've done it twice in what they call mini pilots, so continuous studies. And we're getting over 90% manganese recovery. And we're showing we can do all of that continuously. So what have we achieved from our continuous studies? We announced the latest, the third study that we've done. We announced that about 3 or 4 weeks or so ago. So within that latest result, we showed 95 to 99% manganese recovery in continuous mini pilot testing. We actually produced the manganese crystals, so the high purity manganese sulfate crystals, which is the material that goes into the battery. And we did that within the Chinese spec, which is at 96% processing in China. That's been our first benchmark, is to make sure we could exceed that spec, and we're doing that on a continuous basis. The key thing, we're doing that with impurity control. When you're dealing with potential supply chain partners, they want to see you doing two things: produce continuously, but produce within spec. And the key spec is impurity control. Calcium and magnesium are the key impurities we need to deal with, or that manganese deposits really need to deal with. And we're being well under the limits for both calcium and manganese. So what next? Having successfully achieved these results at mini pilot, we're now going to scale up to pilot. In so doing, we currently have a team out on site at the moment, extracting a 5-ton sample, because we need more material. Because what our plan now is to scale up, so continue with the continuous studies, but to make them larger. And for that, we need more material. So we're in the process of extracting a 5-ton sample. The next key stage from a go-to-market point of view is producing representative samples. So we're close to doing that. We're already speaking to the Japanese, speaking to the South Koreans as potential strategic partners, but they're going to want to see this process validated, and they want to see some material they can validate themselves. That's the next stage, and that's how we're advancing this project. So that's it on the manganese, focused on, as I say, on those downstream outcomes. If I can turn briefly to Fluorospar. Fluorospar, as I say, is the essential material that feeds into critical, highly strategic industries in America in particular, the hydrofluoric acid and fluorine supply chains. Fluorospar is essential for battery materials, semiconductors. So when we talk about the AI revolution and semiconductors and hyper data centers, etc., we think of software, we think of algorithms, and we think of infinite scalability. But there's one limiting factor. You cannot etch or fabricate a semiconductor without hydrofluoric acid. You don't have hydrofluoric acid without fluorospar. You don't get a nuclear reaction without hydrofluoric acid. Refrigerants, battery materials, these are essential materials. And just like manganese, fluorospar, 100% import into the US. So these are, again, strategic, existing industries reliant on imports from overseas countries. In terms of the supply-demand dynamic, we're seeing tight now, so we're seeing supply increasing greater than demand, but we're seeing the demand tightening over time, increasing over time with supply tightening. So it's only going to get worse. It's like a lot of these, but you look at the forward-looking charts on a lot of these materials, and fluorospar is no different. You're going to start to see structural deficits moving into the 2030, 2035. So, and that's global. So as usage increases, it's going to become more critical to have these domestic supply chains. We currently have, there's one just starting to operate, one mine in Utah just starting to operate. The rest, as I say, is imported. So with these critical industries, it's just so important, strategically important for countries like America to have domestic supply. And that's our goal, is to be a domestic supplier of fluorospar. In terms of what we're doing, even though this is a brownfields site, as I said previously, America was the largest producer. And it was like, the way I describe what happened back in the 40s and 50s, it was like the Pompeii moment. One day, lunchtime, everyone just picked up their lunch pails and went home. And so you've got all of these disused brownfield sites across America, all of them previously underground mining sites. The thing we liked about Fluorite Ridge, as I say, is the possibility of doing open pit mining. So what we're seeing with a lot of the other projects that are just starting to come to fruition is that they're just trying to reactivate the brownfield site without really looking at establishing those baseline requirements for building a mining project. So we're going back to square one, even though we're not looking for this stuff, because we've got 7 to 8 past producing mines on our 7-kilometre land holding, but it's never been explored. 7 kilometres has never been explored. So we've done the soil geochem, we've done the mapping and the sampling, etc. This is boring stuff that doesn't get too many headlines with announcements, but it's so critical to see how we build out this resource, because if we want to create a meaningful supply chain in the US, we've got to hit by our estimation, about 150,000 tonnes of CAF2 of fluorospar a year. So we've got to build a resource base to give the government and to give our potential supply chain partners some confidence that we can be a credible source of supply into the future. So again, we're going back to square one, doing all the baseline geological work. We're also doing a lot of environmental work. And we're doing a lot of social license work as well, because we're new to New Mexico. We're not to pretend that. So we're not going off and doing drilling and doing all these invasive activities. Most of what we're focusing on is environmental baselines, non-invasive geological work, and connecting with First Nations, connecting with government, connecting with other stakeholders in the state. It's important that we understand what their wants are, they understand what our goals are, and we work cooperatively to building a sustainable business in that state. The other key thing we're doing, which is, it's the same with the manganese, there's no use building a resource if you can't do anything with it. My grey hair shows that I don't want to be around waiting another 10 years drilling out stuff and then hoping something works. I want to develop this business as quickly as I can, but do it properly. So we are working with government, we're working with laboratories, etc., on things like mineralogy and liberation studies, on flotation and gravity separation, to make sure the material that we can extract from Fluorite Ridge can in fact turn into these high purity materials. And it may sound like a strange thing to be doing, to why we're going into process development when it's already been our mine site. Well, we're not just looking to re-establish the underground mines, we're looking to go into the outcrops, into the hinterland, to bring in a lot of the material that's never been tested before. And that's been the focus of our exploration, and is the focus of our process development as work as well, because that's where we've got the potential for bulk tonnage, and that will then augment the material we know already exists in the underground mines. So the permitting is key. We've appointed a permitting company, we're appointing a separate water company, we're dealing with New Mexico Geological and Mineral Resources Bureau, and New Mexico Economic Development, doing some work with early work with the Department of Energy and other laboratories. So we're trying to build the foundations, the long-term foundations for a project, and that's our goal on this project in this state. Where we're situated, and you can see in the middle of the map. Sorry, it's a bit of a messy map, but you can see in the middle there is the Fluorite Ridge project. A lot of infrastructure there, both road and rail. So it's a great place to be. Power, both renewable power and traditional power sources. There's a big push in New Mexico for geothermal, so we're really looking seriously at that, how we can tap into that. We can see some big projects both in the adjoining Arizona as well as in New Mexico itself. So very much about trying to tap into what's important to the state. We know water is important to the state, so how do we use water responsibly, recycle where possible, and making sure we're a net producer of water, not a net user of water, and really being mindful of other needs within this area. The other key thing is, if you want to be part of a supply chain, you want to be proximal to your supply chain partners. So if we look at the right there, we can see this strategic manufacturing corridor Arizona, Texas, and Louisiana for semiconductor manufacturing, fluorochemical manufacturing corridor, and fluorochemical manufacturing, both in Louisiana and Texas. So we're proximal to be able to supply the materials we develop at Fluorite Ridge to these downstream customers. The other important thing is we can see the town of Deming there. Deming was one of those wonderful, old industrial towns. It's our goal to bring advanced manufacturing or to bring advanced manufacturing to that town. We want to be producing high value jobs, producing an industry that's going to bring wealth to the area. So it's not just about it's not about a mining and taking from the environment, taking from the community. This is about giving back wherever possible from an economic and a social point of view. So that's the story in terms of Fluorite Ridge. It's all about building a business, and I just want to run through just in a summary form, just the value accretive catalysts, a number of near-term milestones that are all about building the business and also building the platform from which we can sustain the business. So resource growth. We have the resource in Western Australia. We have opportunities for growth in the north, as I've said. We're doing all the work, the geological baseline work at Fluorite Ridge to build a maiden resource there. So there's growth potential on both projects. The key thing we're doing on both projects, metallurgical advancement, because it's all about the downstream. So we're optimizing the manganese flow sheet. We've produced the high purity manganese materials. We now want to start scaling that process up. We're starting to do all the baseline work on a fluorine flow sheet. And so we're embarking on those beneficiation studies, and also then leading into product qualification with the strategic partners we're talking to. Permitting progress. It's all about the studies, environmental, it's about engagement, defining those permitting pathways, and also the stakeholder engagement as well. Strategic engagement with government, industry collaboration. As I say, we're talking both to government in Australia and America. We're talking to key supply chain partners, strategic partners as well, in terms of support and in terms of offtake. In terms of development, pre-feasibility studies are advancing on both projects, and then it's about creating that pathway to value realisation. So it really is about discipline execution, but building shareholder value along the way. The shareholder value comes from executing on the project downstream, and that's exactly what we're doing. In terms of the team, again, the focus is not just about the mining and the resource, it's about the downstream processing, the commercialisation. Mel Sanderson is our chair, former US State Department executive for 30 years. She was in-country manager for the DRC, working for Freeport there as country manager. So deep experience, deep US experience, invaluable to our business. My own background, it's my third and last public company. So all of the experience I've had in building these companies, been in critical minerals for the last 15 years. This is the focal point for me, bringing all the stuff I've learned into this industry. Mitchell Smith, very well known, local Canadian, battery materials executive. He brings a lot of in-market and go-to market experience to our business, and it's a privilege to have Mitch on board. We bought the manganese project from a company called Trek Metals, a listed ASX company. Derek Marshall is the CEO of that company. Great experience with manganese, great experience with mining and exploration in Western Australia. So it's great to have Derek on board. What we've done differently in this company and other companies, I've put together technical advisory board. We've brought together a commercial advisory board because given the advanced nature of our project development, we've brought in the technical capability. We need the go-to-market capability. Joe Cadaveric is building the only refinery in Australia, critical minerals. Was the head of mining for Deutsche, was the CEO and now chair of Cobalt Blue, which is a cathode producer in Australia. Deep experience with the Japanese and the South Koreans, so he's bringing a lot of experience to us. Tyson Hall, US strategic advisor. Tyson worked for many years with Albemarle, built lithium plants, ran their bromine business. Bromine, like fluorine, is a halogen, understands this business, understands US supply chains like nobody else. Technical team, John Levings, technical director, worked with him for 20 years. Mark Stevenson, Dr. Mark Stevenson, the key process guy, worked in critical minerals, but on the processing side, very pragmatic, very smart. Dr. Clyde Smith's been working with me on building the portfolio in the US. I spoke about the capital structure, highly aligned to shareholders, 52% insiders, 47 million shares on a fully diluted basis. In terms of brief summary, strategic positioning, We're on point in terms of government, manganese for battery supply chains, Fluorospar for fluorine and hydrofluoric acid supply chains, tier 1 jurisdictions, aligned with US and allied strategic priorities, developing not just the resource, developing the downstream pathway. And why does that matter? We will be selling into structural growth markets, high value end markets, focus on downstream with multiple value drivers. So our approach, just to finish up, low friction resource development, because that's the key to getting these projects permitted into value added processing in America. Thanks very much.